What is going on, everyone? This is Dr. Josh Funk, and you are listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast.
What's up, everybody? It's Dr. Zach Baker, and I'm here with Bami Adu and Christian Huckfeld, our two residents here at R2P in our sports residency. And we are a little bit over halfway into the sports residency, and one of the things that they're required to do is a book club. So we have them read one book coming into the residency, and then we try to get the other four done in a quarterly fashion throughout the residency. And this month, we just wrapped up the book, The Culture Code, which I think it's a great book if you haven't read it or been exposed to it, and just a lot of great take-home messages from it. So I'm excited to hear what their thoughts are on it. Admittedly, it has shaped a lot of what we do at R2P and just some of the efforts and the intentions that we have within the company. And I was first exposed to the book by our owner, Josh Funk, who had passed it along to me. And after reading the book, it was pretty evident that things that he was doing personally and professionally and things that he was asking us to do professionally were reflective of what he found in this book. And I think there's some really good take-home messages from it. So, Bami, first question, starting off with you. Just as you went through the book, who was your favorite character, or what was your favorite story about like an organization or a company that you got from the book?
Yeah, so one of the stories we're kind of talking about how do you kind of weed out the bad apples, and they made a story about Zappos, which is like a shoe company, and what Zappos did to weed out the bad apples, that after training, they paid anyone $2,000 if they decided the company wasn't for them. And I like that story because it kind of helps you weed out the bad apples, right? See who's in there for the long run, see who's in there for short term, and see who's actually in there for the right reasons. If you deem the company to be somewhere you want to work at, I don't think $2,000 is enough to kind of get you away from the company. But, some people did take the $2,000, and that kind of proves to show that they're probably not the best one for the job in the long run. So I kind of just like that because it sounds kind of like a weird tactic to pay someone $2,000 to leave your company before they start. But it's also a great way to kind of find who's really there and to find the best purposes for your job.
I think the other thing it does is it puts accountability on the company. And if you present people with this option and you don't have a great company to work for, you're going to be giving out $2,000 a lot. So I think it's a great way for the company to kind of put their money where their mouth is. And if they think that they have a great product and they think that they have a great environment, then the results should speak for themselves. And I like how you hit that it does really weed out, like, who are the people that think they're going to be long-term fits and long-term hires here. And, now at my point in my career where I do have a little bit more of a role from an administrative and from a management side of things, and I'm actively involved in trying to find and retain talent for our clinical staff, one of the most frustrating things is just, going through that process in general. And if you only have to go through that process once and you land somebody really good and you can find a way to make sure that they're happy for the long portion of their career and can stay with you for a longer amount of time, it really takes just the day-to-day stress of having to deal with that transition of people coming in and out of your company. So I like that idea of kind of putting your money where your mouth is. And, hey, you said you wanted to work here. How much do you really want to work here? Here's $2,000 for you to walk out the door right now. What, Bami, what is, I guess, something from a company culture that you think is a great trait to have as a company? Or after reading this book, what was something that kind of stuck out to you that was a common theme of great company culture?
Yeah, so the book kind of talked about three big themes that build a great company culture. One was like building vulnerability, building safety, and then the other one was establishing a purpose. And the one I liked the most was kind of building safety. And the book talked about like belonging cues and kind of saying like in order for something to work optimally, people have to feel like they're kind of worthy to be a part of the group, and they have to kind of get that constant reinforcement that, hey, like we chose you for a reason, you're a part of this group. And I like that the most because I think that most times when people start to feel insecure about their position in a role, then that's when other negative behavior starts to happen. So if someone does not feel safe in a company, then they won't be vulnerable in a company, and then they tend to lose their purpose in a company. So all the other things they kind of mentioned in the book all make sense, but I think that vulnerability and purpose doesn't happen without feeling safe in a company.
Yeah, no, that was something that the chapter that Greg Popovich of the San Antonio Spurs was highlighted on was that topic of belonging cues. And some of the ones that they had in there were saying things such as, you are part of this group. This group is special. We have high standards, and I believe you can reach those standards. And it sounds funny, but just saying that stuff out loud, it reaffirms your belief. And if you ever have somebody that does not live up to those standards, you can look back and say, we had this conversation. This is not the first time that we're talking about what we expect you to do. And I don't want to have that conversation again. And I think that's something that you try to be as upfront with people of what they're looking to get out of an organization or a role or a job or whatever they're looking for. And on the other end, if you're the person providing that role, that job, that career opportunity, making sure that you are letting them know, hey, this is what we're looking to find. I think you have that in you. We'll do everything in our power to help that happen, but this is a two-way street. Christian, you can't see it. Christian Baume are laughing at me because I planned on going a certain route with this, just in the order of things. Christian, we'll circle back to you. Going back to just favorite characters or organizations or stories from the book, what was one that really stuck out with you?
Yeah, I mean, the one that stuck out with me most is the chapter or the part that discussed the Navy SEALs and the way they really structure their missions, but more importantly, how they reflect on them afterwards. So they talked a lot about AARs, after action reviews, which are really kind of intense debriefings after these types of missions, where everybody kind of comes together, sits in the same room, and has an open and honest dialogue about what went well, what didn't go well. One of my favorite quotes of that part was, it was something to the extent of, ranks are off, humility is on. So no matter kind of where you are in the organization, no matter what role you play, all of that gets set aside when you walk in the door. Everybody sits down at the table, has a good conversation, constructive conversation. What went well? What do we need to do better? Especially considering these missions are frequently life or death. And then they highlighted actually some of the missions that did not go according to plan, but yet the Navy SEALs were still able to complete those missions based on a lot of those reviews that they had kind of in the preparation stages.
That was another part of the book that I really liked, and they had a guy in that group, and it was funny because they described him as someone who, when they did IQ tests, he wasn't always testing out as the most intelligent person. When they did physical fitness tests, he wasn't the person who was at the top of the class. But if you asked anybody on the team who they wanted to go on a mission with, or if they needed to trust somebody in a very high stress, in their field, life or death situation, it was unanimous. Everybody would always pick this person. And I equate it to growing up. It's like your one buddy that when you're on the playground, it doesn't matter what game you're playing, but you want him on your team. And it doesn't matter if you're playing kickball, you're playing basketball, you're playing capture the flag, you're doing whatever. Like, oh, I want him on my team because we're going to find a way to get this done. And whether it's just because, they have all the traits of a good teammate, they communicate well, they're upbeat, they're motivated, they try hard. But for whatever reason, that person always kind of has a nose for victory and how to get things done. Christian, what were, in your mind after going through this book, just traits of a great company culture or a great organization?
Yeah, I think Baume did a good job highlighting the safety aspect of it, but I'll kind of build off of that. And for me, I think it's vulnerability. I mean, I think being vulnerable as an individual really helps to make the company vulnerable to everyone, so everyone can kind of see that. One of the quotes that I really liked was that vulnerability does not come after trust. Being vulnerable leads to trust. And I think that's something that I kind of had mixed up in my mind before reading this book, but really thinking that you had to trust somebody in order to be vulnerable, but really kind of makes you think that being vulnerable with somebody over time, continuously, especially if it's a relationship that goes back and forth, allows the two of you and then groups larger as well to build that trust over long. So vulnerability, I think it is for me.
Definitely, and I think that's something where the more you show you are vulnerable, the more people have an understanding of who you really are. And it's hard to trust somebody if you don't know who you're actually interacting with and who you're dealing with. So obviously they will go hand in hand, and the more you trust somebody, I think the more you are going to open up to them. But there has to be something to let you get your foot in the door in the first place. Bami, going back over to you, I know you've got a background as a soccer player. You played throughout your life. You played in college. You've gone through PT school. You've gone through undergrad. You've probably held several either part-time jobs throughout your life. You've gone on different clinical rotations. You're now at the first point in your career. What I'm really getting at is, at this point, you've been a part of a lot of different teams in a lot of different contexts. Can you elaborate just on, in all of those experiences, what is the best team or organizational culture that you've been a part of? And then is there one that sticks out as maybe not the most ideal? And whether it was the worst one you've been a part of, or just one that maybe you didn't live up to expectations, or it didn't go as planned. But what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I go first with the best team I've been a part of, and that will go back to my sophomore year in college. When I was playing for the soccer team, that was the year we made it to the America East Championship. Shout out U-Heart. So going back to what made that team so great, to start off with, we had great leaders, and at that time, as like a younger guy on the team, I kind of took that for granted, and then looking at how other seasons played out and other roles I've been in different teams played out, great leaders is really important. And one thing about us that was great was that we were a very humble squad, and we took accountability. And again, those are things where it sounds cliche and it seems like it comes like second nature, but it doesn't really. And I feel like people notice it when it's not happening, and when it's happening, we don't really appreciate it as much. And then a big thing, like kind of what Christian talked about before, is vulnerability. Going back to the book kind of talked about when building a culture, there's two important parts when it comes to vulnerability, right? It's the first disagreement and the first time someone shares a vulnerability. And I think when I look back at that team, we had a lot of guys with egos, but together we're all pretty humble together. And then looking back to some of the guys arguing or some of the arguments with our coach, it wasn't like, okay, everyone turned on each other. It was like, okay, let's sit in a room right now and kind of hash it out and talk about it. And when you see that after a big disagreement like that, it wasn't like some guys take one guy's side or some people take the coach's side. We all kind of talked about it, and we kind of just said either agree to disagree or kind of made a collective agreement. And another big thing was vulnerability. Admittedly, this is the one thing that I always had struggle with. And I think just being a part of that team and being a part of guys I call like friends for life, we're all very vulnerable with each other. Like, we're best friends first before we're teammates and anything else. And again, back then I didn't realize how important that was. But I think, sitting with one guy, eating lunch with him and knowing his story, what made him come play soccer and the struggles that he deals with, it makes you go for that 50-50 ball a little bit harder on the field, right? It makes you kind of fight a bit harder for that guy. And that's what made our team so great, was that we're all very vulnerable with each other. We took accountability, and we just love to be around each other. So that was something I always look back at, and I'm like, that's kind of how I want my teams and my culture to look like going forward. And then, funny enough, looking at the other side of the spectrum, the worst I've been a part of, it's my senior year at U-Heart playing soccer there. And it was honestly the exact opposite of what I just mentioned, right? I think at that point in time, we just had a lot of egos, a lot of guys who look to point the finger. And with a lot of egos, you lack that vulnerability because everyone thinks they're too good to show that, or people don't even want people to know what they're going through. So it kind of just felt like 11 different guys on the field rather than one cohesive team. And I think that it was very, like I said, it's very apparent when those type of attitudes show, because now guys aren't sitting next to guys eating lunch together. Guys are kind of sitting by themselves on the bus. Coaches talking, guys are rolling their eyes. There's different groups now. So that was like a very toxic environment, and it showed on the field. We probably won 3 games that year. So I think going back to even the Culture Code, a book that we read, our first book, they talked a lot about an ideal team player. And I think, the Ideal Team Player was the first book we read. And it talked about what an ideal team player is. And I look at the Culture Code, it really much correlates with each other. What makes a good individual part of a team, and then looking at big picture, how can an individual use his own assets to make a better culture, a better team for the rest of us.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's honestly the reason we have them in that order. The ideal team player is about identifying people that you think are going to be a great fit for your team or for your company. It's kind of the analogy of like, get the right people on the bus. And then once they're on the bus, you can figure out, are they in the right seat in the bus to be successful? And that's really what the purpose of these books in our book club is. The ideal team player is identifying, hey, we brought you into this residency program because we think that you are going to be successful with your mission and our mission aligning together, and you possess the traits that we think are going to allow us to execute that. Culture code is about, we got you here, now how do we keep you here? What do we as a company need to do to be held accountable to make sure that we're getting the best out of you, Bami, and the best out of you, Christian? And when Samantha was here last year, we were getting Samantha at 100% every day, because she felt like she belonged, and you guys feel like we can provide for you and we can maximize what you have with us. So that's kind of the background on why those two books are part of our book club. And gosh, man, you went so many different ways with the stories that you had that we could go on those for hours. But you had mentioned, and it alludes back to what Christian had said, like humility is on, ranks are off. Same thing in a team environment. Like I've been a part of teams where captains really think they are captains beyond the point of where they are no longer humble and, oh, I'm not carrying water out to the field. I'm going to make the freshman do this because I'm a captain and he's a freshman, and we've got to put him in his place. And I understand there's moments of tough love or, kind of, working your way through the ranks, but at some point it just becomes silly. And I remember one of the coolest clinical rotations I went on, went out to Arizona, was at Fisher Sports. They have recently merged with Spooner Sports. But the first day that I was out there, I saw the owner of the company, who worked in professional sports as well, treating right next to the students in the middle of the training room. While he was doing that, some of his most tenured PTs were taking the trash out and doing laundry, while students were doing some of the more glamorous stuff with patients, getting hands-on interaction with them and being able to develop plans of care. And there was a clear delineation of roles while we were out there, but nobody was above any role or responsibility. And that was something that it just resonated from me from day one. And I understood, like, this is going to be a great clinical rotation. Like, egos are aside, everybody knows what's expected of them, but everybody's always willing to put in a helping hand. And then by the end of the first week, I remember 3 different people on that staff. One was my clinical instructor. The other 2 were just other PTs that were there that were not my CI. They all stayed after clinical hours to go over stuff with me. One just stayed after to go work out with me. Another one stayed after to teach me a technique, and another one stayed after, honestly, just to kind of get to know me more and have a conversation. And that was, it was something that made me realize, like, you can do PT at a very high level on a very high scale and still do all of these very basic things well. And I think because you're doing these basic things well, probably allows you to achieve some of the other things that were mentioned. Christian, what about you? Best and worst organization, team, company that you've, if not even been a part of, have been exposed to?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and Bami really tackled a lot of the important components. I mean, I think it's all about just willingness as an organization and an individual to kind of go above and beyond. It's people who want to be there, who show up every day with a passion to do what they do, people who are vulnerable with each other, people who are trustworthy of each other, and who support each other and kind of put the client or whoever you're working with first. I think all of those things are just really kind of the meat and potatoes of what a good culture does. I worked a summer job years and years ago at a day camp, Willow Grove Day Camp, and all of those things I think really rang true. It was a great organization, similar to what you had just said right there. The boss was helping kids get in and out of the pool, was helping kids get to recess or do whatever they needed to do, just as some of the other camp counselors were. And everybody was really working as a cohesive organization. Nobody had a role that was too high or too low than the other one. And through that, everybody wanted to be there, and everybody loved being around each other. And so I think that was probably the best company culture. And going the opposite way, one winter I worked a winter job for a department store who will remain unnamed, but it was the opposite. It was people who didn't want to be there. It's people who treated it only as a job. And of course, I worked that winter job because I needed money in the winter. I mean, let's be honest, let's call a spade a spade. But at the end of the day, I would have liked to work for an organization or a company of people who wanted to be there and would have made it fun. But at the end of the day, people just kind of came and went. There was no cohesiveness. There was no conversation in the break room on lunch. It was very much people came, they worked, and left. And because of that, it was certainly a difficult winter to get through with the job.
So if they were offering you $2,000 on day one, you probably would have walked out with that?
Maybe.
And it's pretty cool because, one that resonated with me was a clinical rotation. Bami brought up his college soccer experience. You brought up working in a department, retail store, and also the summer day camp at earlier parts in your life. And all of these traits that we find as being important and valuable, they're synonymous across all different fields and across all different careers. So I think a lot of the things that we talk about just being a good, genuine human being, an individual, are the same ones that are going to lead to professional success and business success. And it translates very well with that. Both of you had alluded to being, maybe you're in an environment where people just aren't that enjoyable to be around. They seem grumpy, or they seem moody, or they seem like something is off. But Bami had also talked about earlier where one of the best teams he was a part of, they made a point to get to know each other. They made a point to eat together, to sit together, to have conversations about things other than whatever the sport or activity that they were involved in, and just getting to know one another on a little bit more intimate level. And I think that goes hand in hand with building that vulnerability, building that trust with one another. And if you have that trust and you have that vulnerability, you may learn more about why your teammate's always grumpy. Maybe he has something going on at home. Maybe he has something going on at school. And maybe they're presenting in that manner because there's something that is causing them to be that way. And if you've developed that trust, you can learn more about that. And that doesn't mean that you need to bring your personal life to work every day, or you need to bring your problems for other people to deal with them. But if you have those open lines of communication of like, hey, man, I'm a little bit off today. I didn't sleep well last night. My kid's sick. I've been up since 4. Like, I'm good to go. But if I'm not as talkative today, it's not you. I'm not feeling it today. And I think having just those little quick, like 10-second conversations, it puts everybody on the same page. And if Bami knows that, then he knows, hey, you know what? Zach's here. He's given his effort. If there's anything I can do to pitch in, I'm here. And then you end up reciprocating that in the future. So it all comes full circle. It all comes hand in hand. One thing that we have tried to do at R2P, just from developing a culture, is being very intentional with our in-services and how we structure them within our company. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but Bami and Christian, and I don't care which one of you goes first, now that you've been here for about 7 months, what are ways that you think we can foster and facilitate just a great culture at Rehab to Perform, or really just in the PT field in general?
Yeah, I think something that we do a lot of right now, one thing that Chris and I haven't really talked much about that the book talks about is like establishing purpose. And I think that's something that we do pretty good at R2P, is establishing purpose. And that part of the book, when we talk about establishing purpose or saying, make catchphrases, constantly tell people like what we're about, what the company's about, what your role in the company is. And when I thought about that, I kind of think about like when we start off any year with like a goal, or we have goals or something that we want to improve on, I think the best way to do is like writing it down, right? Writing it down and then constantly reassuring yourself what your goal is. That's no different than journaling every night, right? Kind of thinking to yourself, how do I feel? What did I accomplish today? What do I want to accomplish the next day? and I look around a place like R2P, it's all over the walls, right? Our core values, what we stand for and what we're trying to be. And that gives that constant reminder as you're walking your patients to the next exercise. You kind of see it in front of your face. And some days you can look past it, but then other days you probably just look back at it and like, okay, that's what we're doing. That's what we're here for. And with a profession like physical therapy, it's we should always constantly remind ourselves why we're in it, right? We're in the business of helping people out. And I think that's every day is going to be a different day. It's going to have its different trials. But I think that if you could constantly remind yourself, like, why you ever got into this and your job is to assist people and to help people, I think it'll make every other day go a little bit smoother and a little bit easier.
Christian, what do you got?
Yeah, I think it all starts from the second that we hire somebody here at Rehab to perform. So without giving away the exact process and everything that goes on, I mean, frequently, at least with residency candidates, and I think for new hires as well, they not only do they complete an interview with either you, Zach, or Josh, or somebody else kind of leading into that, but then they'll come shadow a day at the clinic, and it's not a day where they're being put at a table and there's 12 people sitting at them and asking them 1,000 questions. It tends to be a little bit more casual because that's what our culture tends to be here, but they spend time with everybody in the organization, everybody from our front desk staff to every one of our PTs, from a PT who's been there 11 years to a PT who has been there 2 weeks, and the students and our high school interns, and get to interact with everybody. And through that, I think us as staff members get to see how each individual interacts with people who are much more experienced and much more tenured than them, and people who are less experienced and younger than them, and gets to see how each individual treats somebody else. And I think through that, we can see organically at least a little bit better of what kind of a culture fit that individual is. Do they treat the high school intern the same exact way as they treat the site director? Or is there maybe a discrepancy between that? And I think just having that be a factor, and then also asking each individual who interacted with the potential hire, what did you think? What experiences did you hear about, or what are your impression? I think allowing each individual to also say their piece and have an input into the decision-making process really makes it so that when and if the individual is hired, everybody is already on board. Nobody feels like they have to kind of really restart or really vet this person. They can kind of trust that they've been vetted by everybody in the organization, and it's a smooth transition to start.
And to piggyback off that, you had mentioned providing the opportunity for people to express their concerns or express their desires. And you're not always going to be able to give people the answer that they want. They may want something that your company or your organization or your team cannot provide, but what you can provide for them is the reason or the rationale as to why you can't. And I think that's something that Josh does a great job here. Is he's open for feedback, and it's an open door policy. If you ever want to talk with him, you have the opportunity. And if you ever have a concern, he's open to hearing that. And he'll flat out tell you either, hey, I didn't even know that was a concern. Here's how we're going to address it. Or, yes, I do understand that is one of the limitations we have. These are the reasons why it is the way that it is. And unfortunately, these are the ones that are outside of our control. These are the ones that are within our control and the steps that we're making for that. But this is kind of where it is. This is why it is that way. And I think when people start to understand the reasoning and the rationale behind decision-making, then the actual outcome and the decision that was made is more well-received. Bami talked about our mission statement, our core values kind of hitting you in the face. We're in this podcast room right now, and right behind me on the wall is our core values, which they are in every office. We can see them. Patients can see them. That's no secret about it. Number 2 on the wall is education. And when we opened up as a company, we prided ourselves on being really like an educational hub for the community, for the patients, for the PT profession as a whole. And that's something that has driven a lot of our initiatives here within the company. It's why we have an internship program with the local high schools to give them an opportunity to see, is PT a career that I would want to go into? It's why we have clinical rotations for PT students. We went through it as students ourselves. We think it's kind of a way for us to give back to the profession and just keep that cycle going for future students and incoming students as well. And it's ultimately what drove us to do the residency program. We think that the field is moving in a direction where residencies and fellowships are going to be more heavily sought after with a higher volume of participants. We think that it's a great way to get our staff involved in ways outside of just patient care and part of their day-to-day and weekly demands. And it's something where we think that we have a unique service in regards to sports PT in the outpatient field, and we think that it's something that we can help make a more visible platform for others in the field to see how we're doing it and see if it's a way that they can implement it into their own practice. And it's also a way, honestly, where people see us do something and they say, hey, that's pretty cool, but have you thought about this? We just started doing this at our company a year ago, and we've had great results. And we would have never had that conversation with that organization in the first place if we wouldn't have been open and transparent about how we run and operate a business. And then also be humble enough to answer that message when somebody says, hey, I think you can make this better. And it's something that I think hopefully I've gotten better at throughout my career, just being more receptive and more open to feedback, and then ultimately being actionable with what that feedback is. Bobby and Christian, I hope you guys enjoyed this book. For anybody who has not read it, The Culture Code, it's the third book that we've read. Ideal Team Player was the first one that we read. Biased was the second one that we read. Culture Code is the third. We've got two more coming up. Crucial Conversations will be the next one that we're reading. And if you have any recommendations for what you think should be added, we are all ears for it. So appreciate your time and attention, and reach out if you have any questions or want to talk more on the Culture Code. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or have been tuned in for multiple episodes, we would love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Until next time, thanks for listening.